good to be in church today. And we've got a lot of people watching online this morning because it's spring break. So just know that if you're watching this from a beach, we hate you because we're here. But it is good to be in church. So, in between services, somebody accused me of being a hypocrite because of what I preached on in the first service, which is true. But you guys know that, right? Like, I don't preach in such a ways to make you think that I do anything perfect. But I will say this one's one of the ones where I feel like God wanted to teach me it while I was writing it, kind of a thing. So this one is definitely, I feel it for sure, and definitely want to continue to get better at it as well. So you can call me a hypocrite every week. It's cool. If you don't know you're a hypocrite, then you're really a hypocrite. All right, so did you know in Japan that sleeping at work is actually very common? It's a common thing. You just imagine sitting at your desk, you get a little tired, you just lay your head down, just take a nap. And you don't have to worry, but it's not a thing to oh no, the boss is gonna walk by, it doesn't even matter. You know how some of you slack off when the boss is out of town, if the boss has a vacation, you have a vacation at work. It's not like this. They could just, and I even read an article in the middle of a meeting, you get a big conference room full of people, somebody's talking, and somebody will just lay their head down, and it's not frowned upon. Matter of fact, not only is it not frowned upon, it's praised. People think this is a good thing. It's crazy. Now, the reason they think about it the opposite of us, because if you saw somebody doing that at your work, you would think, man, what a lazy loser, right? They're not committed, they don't care, this is silly. They actually think the opposite. They view someone falling asleep at their desk as a sign of dedication, as a sign that they really care. The reason is because it's in the context of their culture, and their culture is just one of way overworking themselves into the state of, if I don't put my head down right now, I'm just gonna kind of pass out. So they actually have really worked themselves into exhaustion. 40% of the population in Japan gets less than 6 hours of sleep. So they just have this culture of, hustle, this culture of work. So if they see somebody falling asleep, they're like, oh man, look at them. Wow, they've really poured it out here lately. And it's a sign of passion and dedication. So I guess at first you're like, ooh, I should move to Japan, but now you're like, maybe not. It sounds like a little much. They actually have a term for it. The term is inamuri, and it literally means present while sleeping. Present while sleeping. And that phrase stuck out to me. I was drawn in by that, present while sleeping. You're there, but you're not there. You're there, but you're unable to really contribute in a way that you should. You're present, but you're passive. You're present, but you're in a lot of ways useless. And I thought about that. And I thought, if I may, a lot of us kind of live like that. Present while sleeping. Maybe not present while all the way sleeping, present while partially awake, right? Present while my batteries are never near 100%. You're there, but you're not all there. I think there's a reason for that. There's a reason that you live your life where your battery's never fully charged. There's a reason you live your life where you're never at 100%. There's a reason you're always exhausted all of the time. So we're in a little 2-week series right now. I joked last week, I have 6 names for a series that lasts 2 weeks. Exuberance and exhaustion, fruitful and fatigued, winning and weary, blessed and broken, mountaintop and mud puddle, harvest and hunger. So last week we talked about exuberance. Last week we talked about the mountaintop. This week I want to talk about the mud puddle. So we looked at some misconceptions last week about what a season of harvest looks like in our life. And I want to look at some misconceptions that we have about a season where we're, stuck in a mud puddle as well. Some wrong thinking about exhaustion. So the story, my phone just buzzed. Just want to make sure it's not my wife telling me my zipper's down or something. Okay, I'm good. It's up. So I have 2 kids that woke up with pink eye this morning. So my wife's watching online. Hi, Lisa, MJ, Zeke. And it's only been 2 weeks since last time you had pink eye, so that's great. Wash your hands, disgusting children. Anybody have young kids? You can just pray for me. You know what it's like. So we're going to look at a story today. It's actually a pretty well-known story. If you grew up in church at all, you know this story. We're going to look at what happens right after the story. It's about a guy named Elijah. So quick, let me give you the Cliff Notes context for what happens here. There's a wicked king in Israel named Ahab. He's married to a woman named Jezebel. And such a reputation that nobody even names their kid that anymore. They were that bad of leaders in Israel. And Israel's kind of turned away from God. They're worshiping this God called Baal. And Elijah is this prophet of the Lord. And the job of a prophet is to draw people back to God, right? To call people out, to call people up. So he's trying to call the people of Israel back to following God. And he actually issues this challenge. He challenges these prophets of Baal to a fight of sorts. He says, hey, we're going to gather up on Mount Carmel. All of Israel's going to come and watch and spectate. You guys are going to build an altar, sacrifice an animal. I'm going to build an altar, sacrifice an animal. But whichever God lights that on fire is the true God. We're not going to bring matches. We're just going to let this thing happen. Which is that's pretty legit, right? You got to be pretty confident to say, I'm going to actually pray and fire is going to fall down from heaven. That's what he's saying. So they do it. They show up on Mount Carmel. Hundreds of prophets of Baal on one side, Elijah by himself on the other. They do their thing, and they make this altar, they kill the animal, and they start praying, they start singing, they start dancing, they even start cutting themselves. Nothing happens. Elijah actually makes fun of them. It's pretty good snarky one-liners he gets in, maybe he's sleeping, maybe he's on the toilet, stuff like he actually says that, he took a bathroom break, stuff like that, making fun of them. They fail. Time comes for the evening sacrifice. Elijah steps up, makes the altar. He has them pour water on the altar, which is a big deal because the other thing that's happening at this point is they're in a 3-year drought. Hasn't rained 3 years. But he says, hey, go get some water, which you don't have very much of, and pour it on this altar 3 times. So they drench this thing. And then he prays a simple but very powerful prayer, and boom, a supernatural fire falls from heaven, and it's supernatural because it burns up the water, the animal, the wood, the altar, the whole thing burns everything up. Making it very clear that that's a God thing, right? That's a God thing, and the people of Israel cheer. They say, okay, we know that Baal is not real and that God is real. And then Elijah points at the prophets of Baal and he says, all right, let's kill them because they're false prophets, so they do. And usually that's where people stop the story, but it's not even done yet. This is still the same day. He's still on Mount Carmel, and he kneels down and prays for rain. 3-year drought, prays for rain. And at first it starts as a little tiny cloud on the horizon that grows, and then there is a torrential downpour. So to recap, from Elijah's perspective, there's 2, it's confusing, but it's Elijah in this one. He calls fire and water down from heaven. Same day, fire and water in the same day. He sparks a revival in Israel where people come back to God, and he defeats this evil that is living in Israel. That's a pretty good day for a prophet, right? I mean, if you're a prophet, that's about it. That's about as good as you can do, right? That's like winning the Super Bowl. That's like throwing a perfect game. That's like coming back after being down 3-1 to the Warriors in the finals. This is as good can get. He has achieved it here. A mountaintop experience in every sense of the word for Elijah. But how many of you know those mountaintops are dangerous because it hurts pretty bad when you fall off on the other side? So he is in that place figuratively, and what happens next, if you've had mountaintop experiences, maybe you're not super surprised, but I think he was. So 1 Kings 19, we'll pick up the story in verse 1. So keep in mind, context. He just did the greatest thing a prophet can do. That's the context. He should be, exuberant. Verse 1. When King Ahab got home and he told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal, so Jezebel sent this message to Elijah. Oh my goodness, your God is the real God. I'm going to worship him now. Right? That's what she should say. Instead, she says, may the God strike me and kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you, just as you killed them. And if you listen to my Cliff Notes version of the story, you have to know that's an outrageous statement, right? The dude just got done calling fire down from heaven. Why are you threatening him? This seems like a bad play here, Jezebel. But the crazy thing is that's crazy, and then even crazier is what happens next. Verse 3, Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and left his servant there. He went alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. Whew. Man, went from way up to as far down as you can go like that. I mean, so there's some questions in that. We don't have time to dwell on all of it, but you got to ask, how do you go from that high to that low that fast, right? Now, and you also have to ask the question, why is he afraid? He just called fire down from heaven. I think it's kind of obvious in the story. He's not afraid to die because he asked God to kill him. So even if Jezebel is going to kill, what does it matter, right? Maybe he doesn't want her to kill him, but he's not afraid to die. So why is he acting like this? Well, I think it's a matter of expectation here. He did the best thing he could do, right? Fire and water from heaven. He ended the 3-year drought. He showed that God is God. The people of Israel come back to God. And Ahab goes home and he's like, all right, the leaders of Israel, surely they're going to follow. Surely they're going to give this madness up of worshiping this false God. Surely they're going to turn back to God. And instead he gets this death threat note. And it wasn't, I think that the note triggered something in him. It wasn't, she's going to kill me. It was more, that's as good as I can do. I actually can't do anything better as a prophet than that, and it didn't work. They still don't want to follow God. So, if you've ever been in your life where you have a loss and then you get discouraged after a loss, that kind of makes sense. But have you ever gotten discouraged after a hollow victory? That's a lot of times that's worse, isn't it? Like where you feel like, hey, I won, I got to the top of the mountain, but the mountain, the view actually wasn't all that cool, and then you tumble down off of it. That's how he's feeling right now. I did as good as I can do, and it wasn't enough. So I read this, he was afraid thing, and I don't think he's afraid of Jezebel. I don't think he's afraid of dying. I think he's afraid of living in a world where he's not enough, where the best he can do didn't do it. And he went to a really dark place really fast, from the mountaintop to the mud puddle. And he's literally asking God, just end it. Because what he's saying, and you notice this little thing there, I'm no better than my ancestors. My ancestors, they all the prophets before me tried to get Israel to follow you, and they failed, and now I've failed too. I'm done. I can't do it. My best was not enough. So what's God going to do with this? The prayer has been prayed. End me. Here's what God does. Verse 5. Then he, Elijah, lay down and slept under a broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, get up and eat. He looked around, and there beside his head was some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and laid down again. Verse 7, the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, get up and eat some more, or the journey ahead will be too much for you. That's That's somebody's life verse right there. It's 1 Kings 19:7. You want to put that, like get a tattoo, get up and eat some more. Anybody? No? Okay, whatever. So Elijah goes from the mountaintop to the mud puddle, and God's prescription here, what God says, hey, you know what you need right now, Elijah, is a nap and some food. Now that's crazy. And I got to talk to the really mature Christians here for a minute. If you've been a Christian for a long time and you consider yourself a mature Christian and you're really spiritual and stuff, I think sometimes we get ourselves in emotional situations. We get ourselves in situations where we start looking for really complex and like spiritual solutions to things. You know, you start thinking, oh man, there's got to be like a mysterious, ethereal answer to this problem that I'm having. And sometimes it's as simple as are you sleeping the way you should? And have you eaten? It's just a super simple physical solution here that God gives him where, hey, Elijah, you haven't rested and you haven't eaten very well. We need to fix that first before we get to anything else. And I think that's a good lesson for us. Maybe go there first. Because I love this. I mean, you have to imagine this from God's perspective. Because again, he just got this, so he's watching this thing happen. You know, Elijah prays for fire from heaven and God's like, yes, boom. God does the thing. And then he prays for rain and God's like, yes, and calls in this thunderstorm. And then Elijah comes down off the mountain. He gets this death threat and he runs over to this tree over here and God's still listening. He said yes to the fire, he said yes to the water, and then Elijah's like, okay, kill me. And God's like, I don't want to say yes to that one. But just imagine God turning to an angel and saying, dude, look at him. He just did all this. Like, go give him a snack or something, right? Like, you gotta help this guy. Like, that was God's heart. Like, isn't that crazy? Of all the things, like he said yes to the fire, yes to the water. How about some bread, man? And he sends an angel specifically, and it's even like homemade, right? It's like baked on hot stones. Like, it's actually got this feel like they cared about it. Something little like that. And I think God's kind of saying to Elijah here, hey, your engine's been running too hot for too long, man. You got the RPMs have been too high here. You can't sustain this pace. You need to stop. You need to turn the engine off. You need to let the steam rise, Elijah. God here orchestrates a period of rest for Elijah. I think that's so important here. So can I propose to you? Maybe the reason you're exhausted all the time, maybe the reason you live your life in immury, present while asleep, the reason you never seem at 100% is because you suck at resting. You suck at resting. You're terrible at it. God created us to live in rhythms. And if you don't live in the rhythms, if you don't respect the rhythm, then you're not going to function the way you're supposed to function. You're just not. You're not. The rhythm of work and rest is built into the way we're designed. God even did it himself, right? In the very beginning of creation, God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. It wasn't because he was tired. God's infinite, right? He did it to give us an example. Hey, this is how I created you. I'm going to go first just to show you. But there's a rhythm here that we're supposed to live in. And if we don't live in it, stuff happens, changes us, it affects us. And what's crazy to me, I gotta tell you this, I'm trying to like preach on this a little bit more because this is one of the things that I get the most vocal pushback on. I'm sure you have secret pushback on some of the stuff I preach on, but this is the one where I get people like, I don't know, like it's like, you want me to rest? Like you want to slow down? That's a crazy solution. And to me, it's nuts because if you said you were hungry and I said, you know what you should do? You should eat. You'd be like, yes, that makes sense. If you said you were thirsty and I said, you know what you should do? Get a drink. And you'd be like, yes. But if you say I'm perpetually tired and I say you should rest regularly, you're like, wait a minute though. Like what about coffee? Have we tried that yet, right? Like you want to try any solution and it's weird because you wouldn't do that with food and water, but you will do it with rest. And rest is the one where God's explicit. That this is a part of the way he created us. So I think, as I've watched and observed, I have two reasons why I think you suck at rest, if you suck at rest, I think there's two reasons. One is that you let your schedule rule you. You let your schedule rule. You don't rule your schedule rules you. You don't control your calendar, your calendar controls you. And I know you've got, even right now as I'm speaking, you have a bunch of like pushback. You have a bunch of reasons. I had to do this and I had to sign up for this and my kids do this and this and this and this and you've got it. But I just want to say a sentence, I know it's a true sentence, that if there's no space in your calendar for rest, it's because you didn't make space for it. That's true. Because who else is it? It's yours. If you don't make time for it, it's not gonna happen. And it will get squeezed out. You need to know that, right? I joke with Lisa all the time, like if there's nothing on the calendar, that doesn't mean that something should go there. So sometimes it's better to actually put the word rest in, right? And actually put it in there and say, it's not empty, it's empty on purpose. We have to make time for this. I mean, can I speak to the rebels here for a minute? You know, those people, if you're like me, every time everybody else looks right, I want to look left. If you're like that, here, let me feed into that a little bit. We live in an overstimulated, overscheduled, overcommitted world. Don't you just want to be different? Like, this is a way to rebel against the spirit of our age. Join me in this rebellion. Come on. Let's not. Can we just say, no, we're going to live in rhythm with the way God created things. Let's not buy into all that. I think Satan loves that. He loves it when we overschedule. He loves it when we're exhausted because he knows we're not as good. He knows you're easier to mess with when you're exhausted. So stop letting your schedule be your master and master your schedule. That's the first reason you suck at rest. The second reason you suck at rest is you feel guilty when you do it. Talking to the moms here, married to one who when she sits down on the couch, I can feel the guilt steam rise off of her. And she sees that there's a basket of clothes there and there's a mess here and this hasn't been done. And she's mentally, I ask her, where are you right now? And she's going. Because you feel guilty not doing something because you think that not doing something is not what you're supposed to be doing. And you feel guilty about it. But the crazy part is, and this is wild, if you want to live the way God actually says to live, you got to flip that. You should feel guilty for not resting. Like when you're going 100 miles an hour and not stopping at all, that's when you should feel guilty. When the engine has not turned off in a while, that's when something should happen in your mind and go, ooh, I shouldn't be doing this. Flip it. You're feeling guilty about the wrong thing. You got to rest. Check out this verse in Exodus. It's super convicting. It doesn't apply to me at all, but you guys definitely need this. Exodus 34:21. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but on the seventh day, you must stop working. Even during the harvest season, or the season of plowing and harvest. So he caps both of them. Now I love that he put that at the end, even during seasons of plowing and harvest. Because, like I already said, God built in this rhythm, right? 6 days you will work, seventh day you're gonna rest. There's supposed to be a weekly rhythm of work, rest, work, rest, work, rest. And then he reminds us here, this isn't the only place in the Old Testament, he reminds us, but he anticipates a pushback that you and I would have, right? Because in normal circumstances, if there ever was any, be like, yeah, that's totally cool. But what about God when things really get busy? You know, what about soccer season? What about baseball season? What about those seasons where stuff just comes at me really fast? And is it cool if I ignore this during those seasons and God anticipate that with the people of Israel? He said, hey, even when you're in the harvest, even when you're trying to get that soil tilled up, even then, rest. Don't let a busy season be an excuse to be terrible at this. Adam, see, I'm talking to me. You don't have to feel it as much. I'm just preaching to myself. And there's a reason for it. There's so many reasons for it, but there's one in this story. I want to show you something. One of the things that happens when you don't rest. There's some things that happen, but it really clearly happens here in this story with Elijah. So drop down to verse 9. There he came to a cave, Elijah did, where he spent the night. But the Lord said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing, man? Elijah replied, listen to this reply. This is crazy. I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. So that's his response. When God says, what are you doing, man? That's what he says. So you can kind of see here that Elijah's fried, right? I have zealously served you. God, my engine's been going and going and going, and I'm serving you. But nobody else is. Israel's in spiritual disaster. He looks around and he just sees bad everywhere. Israel's a mess. The prophets are all dead. Nobody else is serving you. Nobody else is doing anything good. It's all bad and I'm by myself. Everything is awful. If my 6-year-old could sum up this verse, he would say, this is the worst day ever. That's how he says that. And he gets to this place sometimes. So what I give you a little spoiler alert here in a couple verses. We won't read this, but God's actually going to tell Elijah, hey buddy, what you just said isn't true actually. There's 7,000 people in Israel who haven't bowed down to any altars or any idols at all. 7,000 people who have stayed faithful with me. And there's some leaders who are going to step up and lead my people back to me. There's more than just you. So God's gonna tell Elijah, hey, I know you feel that way, but that's actually not reality. You feel like everything is terrible, but it's actually not terrible. So what I want you to see is that when you're down, when you haven't rested, when you've pushed your limits and you've kept that engine running well past when it was supposed to rest, what happens is your perception of reality gets distorted. You actually can't see clear in an exhausted state. Elijah says, I'm alone and everyone's turned away from you. And God says, no, buddy, that's your tired talking. You're really, really in a bad place, but you can't see clearly. So I want you to see in your life that exhaustion distorts your reality. And you know that, right? In general, I think it's pretty well known, right, that you're supposed to be careful when you're tired. You're not supposed to make any major decisions. When you're at a point of exhaustion, that you got to be really careful. You're not supposed to trust yourself, right? Isn't that pretty well known? Everybody kind of generally knows that, hey, if you're really, really tired, don't make major life decisions. Don't trust how you feel in those moments. You need to get some rest. In general, I think we understand this. The scary part is, what if you would say, well, I'm always tired? When can you ever make major life decisions if you're just always running on empty? When can you ever trust how you feel about a situation if you don't have anything left? When can you trust your perception of reality if you're just always, always, always on the brink of exhaustion? That's scary, right? Some of you are like, I'm bad at making decisions. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're just tired all the time. And maybe if you'd get some rest, your decision making would get significantly better. So here's what I'm hoping right now. Hoping we're all at the place where you're saying inside of your head, rest is important. Even some of you, I'm hoping you're getting your phones out and ignoring me and looking at the calendar and going, uh-oh, April already looks crazy. What are we gonna do? And maybe you're working on that. I'm cool with that. If you have your phone out, I'm assuming you're either taking extremely detailed notes or you're on your calendar app right now. I'm gonna always assume that. But there's still a danger left. And for me, this is the big one. This is the big one. I wanna read a couple more verses in the story. They're super familiar if you're familiar with the story, but I want to make a distinction here. So it starts in verse 11. So God says, go out and stand before me on the mountain, the Lord told him. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passes by. And a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, and the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a sound of a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak, and he went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And a voice said, again, what are you doing here, Elisha? Now, you could preach a whole sermon on those verses. It's a pretty spectacular thing. All of this stuff happening, the wind and the fire and the earthquake and all that stuff. And then the gentle whisper. But I want to make a distinction. I want to ask a question because I think Elijah's doing something here that God's trying to correct. And I think we do the same things, but I have to ask you a question. This is a really important question. You have to be able to answer this question. I want to help you answer the question, but I can't actually answer it for you. But this question, I think this is like one of the questions of our day. Because again, like I said, I feel like our society is so bent towards overscheduling and overstimulation and just general buzz happening all the time that you have to answer this question. You have to answer this question. You have to figure this one out in your life. So the question is, do you know the distinction between rest and escape? Do you know the distinction? Because what's happening in this story, and I think the reason God asked Elijah twice, what are you doing here, is because Elijah's trying to escape. He's trying to escape. He's shutting it off. He's closing himself off. He's trying to escape. God is trying to kind of woo him into rest, but he's fighting and trying to escape. So my question to you is, do you know the difference in your life? One's beneficial, one not so much. This is so important because I know some of you, you're sitting here going, I have taken a day off, Pastor, and it didn't work. I didn't feel better, actually. I felt worse because my to-do list got longer and I didn't feel any better, and you're a liar. And to you, I would say, you didn't rest, you escaped. You didn't rest, you escaped. The difference is when you rest, your soul, your mind, your body are restored. You come back from rest more ready to deal with life. When you escape, you feel the same at the end as you did in the beginning. All you did was kind of hit pause, nothing changed. You came back and the movie kept playing right at the same place it was playing. Nothing changed. Escaping does not have the restorative properties that rest does. Rest empowers, rest enables you to regain that energy, that strength, that confidence, that sanity that you lost living. So that you can hit the day with that energy that you're supposed to have, that you that you're supposed to have. But escape definitely, there's an immediate gratification to escape, right? It brings you some level of whatever happiness or control or numbness that you were wanting to get away from. You don't want to feel those feelings right now. But when you come back, you either feel the same, or in a lot of times when you come back from escape, you feel worse because there's an element of surprise with it. I had a whole day where I had a day off, and how do I not feel better? So just the surprise of not feeling better makes you even feel worse, because now what? If a day off doesn't make me feel better, what will? I think that's the way to know whether you escaped or whether you rested, is how do you feel when you're done? How do you feel about getting back to life when you're done? If you feel the same, you escaped. If you feel rested, restored, energized, then you rested. So, geez, Pastor, this isn't very helpful. I know. So I was at this thing a couple months ago, and one of the pastors there mentioned this briefly. He talked about rest and escape. And he didn't talk much about it. He just said it like as a thing for pastors. Like, hey, you got to make sure that when you have a day off, you're resting, not escaping. And then he kept going. And I was like, hold on. So I actually called him and I said, hey, like I have this friend who struggles with this. So could you tell gotta explain this more. So I talked about it. And the frustrating part about this, like when I get to this point now you're like, okay, so tell me what to do then, right? I want to rest. I don't want to just escape. Like, you got to help me here. The problem is rest is kind of different for everybody. So I can't give you some universal, this is what you're supposed to do to rest. There's some guidelines and principles, but I can't tell you because everybody's wired different, right? For some people, you need to be around people, and that's restful for you, you extroverts. But for some of us, you need to not be around people, and that will be restful. For some people, they need to be like active. They need to be doing things. Their body needs to be moving. For other people, they need to be still. So it's really hard to stand up here and preach to a whole group of people and say, this is what you need to do to rest. I actually don't, I can't. You have to. You have to know yourself. Maybe this will require some experimentation, but you need to figure out some things that when you have a day off, that energize you, that restore you, that when you come back, you're ready to hit the ground running. So you have to figure this out. I actually can't give you the answer. Here, but I can tell you a couple things, give you some guardrails. I know that rest is not when you spend like an hour trying to figure out what to watch on Netflix and you finally settle on something that you're not really that interested in, but you turn it on anyways as a background to you staring at this and scrolling through this while that's on, and your attention flits back and forth between those two things. I saw a hilarious, it was like a little meme where it was just words and it said like husband and wife, like, hey, how was staring at your medium-sized rectangle today? Ooh, mine was a little stressful. Mine was so stressful staring at the medium-sized rectangle that I want to come home and stare at the big rectangle. I don't have energy to do anything else. And then the other one goes, okay, I understand, but are you okay if I stare at my little rectangle while you stare at the big rectangle and we sit next to each other? Maybe I send you things from my little rectangle to your rectangle. Like how wild and mad that is that that's actually what we do. I want to say in general, if you spend your day doing that, that's not going to be restful. That's escape. You're escaping into something and your odds are not going to feel better. You're not going to feel better. You're not. You need to find something that is restorative to your mind and your body and your soul. The pastor I was talking to, he gave his example. He was like, hey, for me, it's golfing with some buddies. And when I golf, he goes, it's good because he's an extrovert. He likes to be with people. It's active, it's outside, it's competitive. He said all of those things help restore my soul, so I'm ready to hit it. So, and he takes it really serious. For me, I'm like, that sounds like a nightmare. That's awful. But for him, that was it. But here's what's cool. When I was listening to him, like I heard the way he's like, okay, for me, this helps because it's with people and he knew himself. It's outside, that was important to him. It was competitive, it gave him like an outlet for something. Like he had figured out the elements that went into it and found a thing that helped him. And I think this is really important. You're gonna have to know yourself. If you're lazy and you say, I just need a day off and you stare at a screen, you're not gonna do this. You have to study yourself. You're gonna have to experiment a little bit and figure out what are some things that restore me. So I know what not to do. It's not gonna be 3 screens at once. I also know that on the what you should do side is it's gonna have like, there's gonna be an awareness of God in some way. I don't think resting without God is gonna be very restorative, right? I think when you say the sentence, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Now, when you actually get to that day, how are you gonna include God mentally in that? What kind of gratitude are you gonna have? Maybe it's you go for a walk and you're in the woods and like, it's not just a walk though, it's God's with you and there's a part of that. There's gotta be, God and his presence have to be, you have to make it so that it's an obvious thing for you. You have to be conscious of it. But you're gonna have to figure it out. Because if you just keep escaping and not resting, you're gonna crash like Elijah. And I think when we escape, I bet if you could listen real well spiritually, when you're escaping, when you're wasting your life 7 seconds at a time, I think if you could hear, I think God would ask, what are you doing here? Just like he asked Elijah. And you'd have to admit, like Elijah, I'm just done with the world right now. I think God would say, hey, but this isn't gonna help. This isn't gonna help. You need something restorative. So you gotta figure it out. It's really important. Worship team, why don't you come back up here? I'll end with this. There's another element of rest that's so important. And some of you can acknowledge this really, really readily. Rest has an element of faith to it. Because when you take your phone and put it somewhere and don't have it, when you let go mentally of the things that are on your to-do list and you say, I'm not doing that today, there's an element of where you have to trust God. You can't just put it down. You have to put it in his hands mentally. There's an element of faith to this. And this, by the way, it's not good that we're not good at this, because this is the essence of Christianity as well. We're supposed to rest in what Jesus did for us, right? This isn't, we're not in a works religion here where we gotta do. No, actually, we're supposed to have faith that he did already. So this rest thing is a reflection of the gospel as well. That's how big of a deal this is. That you can say, hey God, I'm gonna work for 6 days, I'm gonna rest on that seventh day, and I actually think me in 6 days plus you is worth more than me 7th day is without you. I'm gonna trust you in that. That's huge. If you look at the Old Testament, that's a part of it. That's why even that verse I read in Exodus, hey, even during plowing season, even during harvest season, trust me. Take a day off, rest, be with me. I'm the master of the universe, not you. That's the message. Can you give it over to him and rest? Turn it off. Pray with me. Jesus, I pray for the person right now who they're like Elijah, Lord. That their engine runs at a really high RPMs and they're just going, Lord. And right now they feel you whispering to them that they need to shut it down and they don't want to, Lord. For whatever reason, maybe they're afraid, maybe they feel guilty stopping, maybe it just feels like the to-do list is already too long and that'll just make it worse. Lord, I just pray that you would draw them into it like you did with Elijah. Slow them down. To trust you. I pray for the person who deals with guilt, Lord, that they think not doing something is what they're not supposed to do, Lord, and I pray that they would rest in you. I pray that we would be a church that rejects the spirit of our age of overscheduling and overstimulation, that we would slow down, that we would be a place, we would be a people that enters into your rhythms. See that it is the best way to live. In Jesus' name I pray.